Welcome to the Delmarva Almanac. Each week we connect you to the best of Delmarva. Now here is naturalist Dave Wilson with a conversation about dragonflies and their kin.
In the studio today we have Jim White from the Delaware Nature Society and co-author with his wife Amy of the Amphibians and Reptiles of Delmarva. Jim is a native Delawarean and has worked for the Delaware Nature Society for 33 years, where he is currently serving as the Senior Fellow for Land and Biodiversity Management. He teaches herpetology at the University of Delaware. Jim just happens to have a remarkably extensive knowledge about some of our flying insect friends, namely damselflies and dragonflies, and today we're going to talk to him about this mysterious and often remarkably beautiful group of invertebrates. Jim, welcome.
Hi, Dave. Good to be here.
First off, can you tell us how you learned about dragonflies and damselflies, and how old are these species?
Yeah, sure. Well, I was lucky enough to meet a friend of mine, no relation, Hal White, who was a retired University of Delaware professor, about 15 years ago. And ever since, we've been going on field trips, and he's taught me a lot about damselflies and dragonflies. He also is the author of the Dragonflies and Damselflies of Delmarva, which was produced by the Delaware Nature Society. I was able to help him a little bit on that book with photography and actually on some of the field trips. Now, the difference between damselflies and dragonflies, that's a question often answered. They're both in the group called odonates, or in the class Odonata. These are, so they're very closely related. However, in the field, it's easy to tell them apart. Damselflies are, as their name implies, is a delicate insect. It flies very slowly. It tends to hold its wings above its back, which is kind of interesting. They also have eyes out on stalks. If you look very close to the damselfly, you'll see the eyes are way out on the side, almost like I don't know if you know a blue crab, how they have them on a stalk. Dragonflies, on the other hand, tend to be robust, very strong flyers. They get a lot larger, at least here on Delmarva, and they hold their wings when they're perched perpendicular to the body, very flat. I'm sure most people know that the difference, probably, if they've seen them in the field.
Do you know how old some of these species, I guess the order really is? I remember as a kid looking at my dinosaur book and seeing these giant dragonflies. It seems like this is an old order of insects.
Oh yeah, actually they predate the dinosaurs. Some of the ancestors of today's odonates were around 300 million years ago, so that predates dinosaurs almost by 100 million years. So they've been around for a long time, and I don't know if you remember, some of those early odonates were large. Some of them had wingspans up to a meter. I know when I was young, I was wishing they were still around.
What would an odonate with a wingspan of a meter eat is the question, I guess.
Oh, well, they probably ate insects, mainly larger insects. Insects were larger back then, and dragonflies were larger for one particular reason. There was a group of animals that had not evolved yet, and that's the birds. So after the birds evolved, dragonflies tend to get smaller. They had to be very much quicker in flight, so they became smaller. And today, the largest dragonfly probably only has a wingspan of about 7 inches.
What are some of the most common species we have here on Delmarva?
Well, one of the most common, it's also one of our larger ones, is the green darner. This is a really beautiful insect. Has a really interesting life history because it's one of the few insect species that actually migrates. It migrates from the south up here to the north every year, and then its offspring migrate back. So it's very commonly observed by people, but there's many other species that you'll see around ponds that are very, very common.
What are some of the most sort of sought after and beautiful dragonflies and damselflies?
Well, there are several that the folks who really go out and look for them, are always searching for. One of them is the elfin skimmer. It's a dragonfly, but it's actually one of the smallest dragonflies in the world. Really gorgeous little species. There's several others that are just very, very beautiful. The Needham skimmer, which is very common actually, especially down here along the coast. But it's one of those species that great to photograph, just beautiful.
You have a sense of how many species of dragonflies and damselflies there are on the peninsula?
Yeah, there's over 130 that have been actually observed. Now some of them aren't here today. They've been extirpated probably. And some of those are probably migrants that just happen to blow in here on a storm.
What do most damselflies and dragonflies eat?
Well, as adults, they all eat flying insects. So they eat flies, they eat butterflies, they eat bees, some of them. They eat all different types of flying insects. Some of the smaller ones actually eat mosquitoes.
Can you talk about their life cycle a little bit? I know dragonflies and damselflies' life cycles are very interesting, and beginning in water, and I think listeners would love to hear about some of that.
Right. All the species here on Delmarva begin in the water. The females lay the eggs in the water or very close to the water. As the eggs hatch, they hatch into larvae, and these larvae are completely aquatic. And the larvae can actually live 2 or 3 years. And that's a little different than the adult. The adults only live for one season, one spring, summer, and fall. So there's basically a double life. The larvae in the water catching little aquatic insects and then transforming to the adult.
Do these species live in a variety of water types? Or in other words, do they need permanent ponds or temporary ponds or creeks and rivers, or is there a preference based on species?
Well, that's a very good question. It all depends on the species. Some species are generalists. They can live in just about any kind of still water, ponds. It doesn't even need to be that clean. They can be actually in water that's somewhat polluted. And then there's other species that are specialists of very clean, cool streams. So yeah, there's a very large variety in what types of water they need.
A lot of frog species need fishless or relatively fishless ponds. Is this true also for dragonflies and damselflies?
There are some species that prefer ephemeral pools or fishless pools. But the vast majority of them seem to be able to deal with some sort of fish pressure. Yeah.
Are there certain birds that target dragonflies and damselflies?
Oh yeah, all the flycatchers, the eastern phoebe, the eastern kingbird. Often if you sit and watch an eastern kingbird, he'll snag a dragonfly.
What kind of threats do dragonflies and damselflies face on the peninsula?
Well, the biggest threat is habitat loss and water quality. Water quality, whether it be the stream that they're laying their eggs in, has become polluted, or even too much sun reaching that stream because the forest has been cut down around the stream. Very serious. So, as water quality degrades, the diversity of odonates goes down.
Where can people find out more about these species?
Well, Hal White's books is a great resource for Delmarva. What he did, he took his 50 years of studying these insects on Delmarva, and he took his experiences with each species, and he wrote vignettes about these species, about the life histories. Just amazing amount of information in that book. I think that'd be the first book I'd recommend. And then there's several others if you go online. There's some books that have just been published about the eastern United States. So you'll find a lot of resources on the web.
We've been talking to Jim White today from the Delaware Nature Society. To learn more about dragonflies and other native wildlife of the peninsula, go to delnature.org or visit us online at delmarvaalmanac.com/nature.
Thanks, Dave. Well, that's all for this edition of the Delmarva Almanac. Be sure to follow us on Facebook or Twitter, and next week join us to learn more about our local culture and get connected to our natural wonders. We'd like to thank our community partners, the Friends of Delmarva Public Radio, and our underwriters for their help in bringing this program to you, our audience. If you'd like to become an underwriter for this program, visit delmarvaalmanac.com/support. Our theme music was provided by Brightside Studio. This show has been a Moonshell production. Thanks for listening. Until we meet again, may the rhythms and tides of Delmarva bring you good fortune.